You know it's a strong sitcom premise when the B story is a pajama party and the A story is Grand Theft House.
So I let the plumber in over at Steve and Marcy's.
Oh, they'll be so happy. By the way, did you know their house is gone?
What do you mean gone?
Gone. Like my hopes, my dreams, my future.
There are episodes of Married with Children that are built around a moral, and this is not one of them. This is a what's the worst possible decision everyone could make type of episode. And then they just keep stacking them. Steve and Marcy leave the Bundys in charge of their house, which history has already proven is a mistake. Peg gives a stranger the keys. A man removes an entire house from the ground. And somehow, the most unrealistic part of the episode is that anyone trusted the Bundys in the first place. What makes it work, though, isn't logic. It's escalation. Every scene just makes things worse. The Rhoades' trip implodes, their house disappears, they end up sleeping on the Bundys' couch, then Kelly's pajama party kicks them out of the living room. It's not coherent, it's not plausible, it's just some good old-fashioned mayhem. And with that, welcome back to The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking the 16th episode of the third season of Married with Children, titled The House That Peg Lost. Written by Steve Rhoades and Mel Scherer, and directed by Jerry Cohen. Let's find out how this one stacks up, starting with the episode overview. Now, we open the episode with Al watching TV. Apparently, he's watching a party of the luckiest men on Earth. Then we hear the TV say, "Oh look, there's Joe Piscopo poolside." This joke is definitely of the time. It's actually a little bit before my time, but I do remember that there was a joke about how Joe Piscopo was untalented and nobody understood how he got so far in life, or how he was able to become a famous comedian or whatever. But anyway, that joke is playing on that. So if you don't know who Joe Piscopo is, or you don't understand the joke, there you go. Anyway, Al turns off the TV and Peggy comes downstairs looking for her ashtray. Then she says, "Oh, there it is," when she sees Al drinking a beer and she puts her cigarette out in the beer can. Of course, Kelly's gonna come down next and she's being super sweet to them, saying she loves them. Why? Well, she's trying to get something, of course, and what she wants is a pajama party. Now, you'd think that wouldn't be a big deal, but apparently the last time she had a pajama party, at 8 years old, she got in a bunch of trouble. Al even says that the judge wanted to try her as an adult. Of course, despite Al's objections, it ends up being allowed. It doesn't help, though, that he signed a piece of paper 8 years ago when she was 8, after the last pajama party, that said that Kelly could have another pajama party when she turned 16. Of course, Bud wants in on the party. How did he know about the party? Well, he heard about it through the peephole in the girls' locker room. They really make Bud a creep, but Peg says Bud has to stay in his room the whole time. And after that, we get some stupid sibling stuff, which, you know, if you've watched enough of these episodes, you know I don't really care that much about. But it did end up culminating in a decent joke. Kelly's gonna tell Bud to eat toe rot, and Bud's gonna tell Kelly to lick roadkill, and then Al's gonna be like, "I'm hungry." But Bud isn't the only one that Kelly doesn't want to leave their room. She doesn't want her parents to either. And Al's like, "It's my house. I should be allowed to roam it freely like any other desperate caged animal." I mean, what's he gonna do? Stuck with Peggy in a room. But Kelly isn't the only one with a promissory note. Peg has one too. It's also from 8 years ago, and it's a promise for sex. To which Al's gonna say, "Is it 1989 already?" So we know it's a real thing. And just then the doorbell rings. Al's hoping it's a bullet with his name on it, but unfortunately it's just something else he doesn't want, the Rhoadeses. They're leaving to go to New York to see a play, and they want the Bundys to help them out by letting a plumber into their house while they're gone. This feels like a mistake, Steve and Marcy. They literally looted your house in the last episode, which I found really funny because as I was watching the episode, that's the note that I took. They looted your house in the last episode, and the first thing that they say after I wrote that note, I was like, "They're gone. Let's loot their house." And they do. Again. They take a radio, a VCR, and I wasn't sure, is this a second one or are they taking it back again? I don't know. And sheets and blankets. They also find a bunch of stuff that feel like Marcy and Steve are keeping secrets from each other, like that the house is only in Marcy's name. But hey, the Bundys may not have much, but at least they don't keep secrets from each other. They say that and then they look away and wince. So we're gonna cut back to Bud, really trying hard to convince Kelly to let him be at the party. Then the writers have him say a line that's just too gross. I mean, he's supposed to be like 13, right? It's just, why would they have them say that he wants to, quote, watch their moist, nubile young bodies? Anyway, Al's ready to get out of the house. He's going shopping and he says he's probably not going to come back. So Peggy, knowing Al, says, "Can you get me some tampons?" And then Al asks, if he's dead, why doesn't he fall? And then right after he leaves, a guy comes over looking for Steve's roadhouse. We can only assume it's the plumber, so Peg gives him the keys to the Rhoades' house. So then we're going to cut to Al coming home from shopping. Peggy's on the couch watching a show apparently titled Woman World, and the episode is Men, Hurt 'em Up, Kill 'em All. Sounds like a good one. But Al's carrying some groceries in, which is a shock in and of itself, and he's gonna make some remarks about how they should make the couch mobile for her. And Peg's gonna be like, "I'll let the plumber in at the Rhoades'." He's like, "Oh, they'll be so happy. You know their house is gone?" Peg doesn't believe it till she sees it, and then is like, "Al, Steve and Marcy's house is gone." And he's like, "Nothing gets by you, does it, honey? Except a house." But Al and Peg are gonna skip town. You know, you can't really blame them. But before they can leave, Steve and Marcy get home early. And Peggy just knows they're going to be in a foul mood, you know, about their house being missing. And then we're going to get a description of what Steve and Marcy are doing because Peggy is watching them through the window. Okay, so they're looking at their hole. Now they're looking back at us. Now they're looking at the hole. And it goes back and forth until they come to the Bundys' door. And when they ring the doorbell, an uncomfortable-looking Al says, "Who is it?" Which was enjoyable already. But Al's going to say, "Why don't you guys get some rest? We'll chat tomorrow." So they ring or knock again, and Al's like, "Who is it?" And when they finally open the door, we see Steve and Marcy looking terrible, with Marcy looking almost catatonic. Not just because of the house, but because the airline lost their luggage and then the hotel lost their reservation. They apparently slept on the street in New York City, and when they got home, they didn't have a house. And so Steve asks Al, "Is there anything you want to tell us?" And Al says that Kelly's having a party and Bud's doing well in school. And then of course Steve interrupts him and says, "Where's our house, Al?" And apparently it's a chicken restaurant in Waukegan. And Al's like, "You didn't think I'd know, did you?" I have to say, I didn't expect him to know either. Marcy, who's been out of it on the couch, comes too and asks Peggy if she let the plumber in. So anyway, we're going to cut to a little bit later, and Marcy and Steve are going to be sleeping on the Bundys' couch. And Marcy's like, "We're homeless." But Steve's going to point out they actually have their VCR and their blankets and anything else the Bundys could strap on their backs and carry out of their house. But hey, it'll all be better tomorrow, right? They should just go to sleep. But just as they're about to fall asleep, the doorbell rings. It's Kelly and her friends in pajamas. They've got a pizza and they're ready to party. But they weren't expecting two oldies sitting on the couch, so they effectively kick Steve and Marcy out of the living room. Now up to the parents' bedroom, where Al and Peg are, and Peg is trying to cash in on that sex promissory note. And Al's like, I don't feel comfortable doing it with everyone in the house. Now Peg is going to take that concern, and she's going to say, "Shut up and pleasure me." And just as they get started, Steve and Marcy walk through the door, and Al is just as pleased as punch to see them. Of course, Peg is annoyed. She even says, "Don't you guys have a home?" And Steve's like, "I'm gonna sue you guys." To which Al says, "Yeah, makes sense. I've had too much for too long." Now, it's been a long day for the Rhoades, and they're just about to fall asleep on the floor of Peg and Al's bedroom when the music from the slumber party starts blaring. So we head back downstairs to check on Kelly and her friends, and they're just bashing some girl named Charlene. Then said Charlene comes out of the bathroom, and they stop. So then another girl goes to the bathroom, and they start bashing her. And then Bud is gonna come downstairs in a bathrobe and holding a pipe. He's also dyed the hair above his ears gray. I'm not sure what he's going for there. Did he think the high school girls would prefer a graying man? Now the girls are going to end up tricking Bud into kissing the dog, and then Bud's going to get his revenge. And his revenge is simply telling Kelly her messages, which are from all the other girls' boyfriends. Things start getting tense and they're calling Kelly names, but the one name that really sets everything off is when one of the girls calls Kelly a Bundy. Then they all start fighting and Bud takes pictures. So we're gonna head back upstairs now, and Marcy can't sleep. There's a joke about Al's feet smelling, but Steve's gonna reassure Marcy and say all they need is love, which is what Marcy said earlier in this episode, and Steve was like, "Yeah, right." But anyway, Al and Peg wake up to this, and Peggy makes a gagging motion. And Al agrees with her, and eventually they can't take it anymore, and they leave the room. And as they go by Bud on the stairs, Bud's like, "Where are you going?" And Al's like, "We're gonna go sleep in the hole." And on top of everything, when they open the door, apparently it's raining. And Al says, "Good, I'll sleep with my mouth open. Maybe I'll drown." And that's the whole episode. Let's see how it ranked.
Oh, wait.
So the rankings are I ranked the episode based on 5 categories. story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I ranked it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then I have a laugh counter where I tally up the amount of times the episode made me laugh. 1 point per laugh out loud gets added to the score. But before I dive into the rankings here, I just want to say if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. Really does help me out. But without further ado, let's go to the first category, which is story. This is kind of a simple story that feels wild. The Rhoadeses go to New York and ask their neighbors to let a plumber into their house. But the guy that shows up was actually somebody that was going to dig up a house and transport it somewhere else, apparently. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's a simple enough plot. There's not really even an arc to it. It's just this thing happens and there's no real resolution. I gave it a 2.5. So that brings us to acting, and the acting was good. I enjoyed everyone. Even the guest stars were pretty good. I gave it a 4. And then on to dialogue. Now, this was a funny episode. What I found really interesting was that in the previous episode, I thought the laugh counter would be higher because I found myself really enjoying it. And with this episode, I thought it would be lower because it was a bit more tedious. And I was wrong both times. That being said, this felt a little paint by numbers with sibling stuff, but it was still a lot of fun. I gave it a 3.25. So that brings us to episode coherence. Besides the fact that an entire house got pulled from the ground, foundation and everything, there's also a little error here. I mentioned it earlier in the overview, but Steve's gonna be like, yeah, right, about Marcy saying that she's at home as long as she's with him. But then later he's gonna express that same sentiment. It's not a big deal. It's not like pulling a house from the ground or anything, but still feels incongruous. I also really don't understand why they would trust the Bundys with the key to their house. But these aren't huge problems. I gave it a 2.25. So that brings us to character relatability. It's a crazy scenario, but I suppose I can relate to what the Rhoadeses are feeling when they get back. I can also relate to the Bundys wanting to skip town. And then there's Bud. Now, he's a creep, but I can certainly relate to the idea of being a pubescent boy who wants to be around a teen girl pajama party.
You what?
I was trying to figure out a way to say that sentence so I don't come off creepy, but I'm just saying that if I was 13, I would want to be around a bunch of 16-year-old girls having a pajama party.
And you are how old?
Still, there's just no way to, I'm just saying I get it. I can relate to it. Anyway, I gave it a 3.25. So that brings us to the laugh counter. Now, the rankings were sort of up and down, but a decent laugh counter will keep it in the top 3 tiers, and it got me 17 times, which is pretty good. So that puts the episode total at a 32.25, which makes it I'd watch it again. For the series, the average is now at a 33.48, which keeps it as an I'd watch it again. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your scores in the comments. I'd be really curious to see where we're aligned, especially with the laugh counter. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out my other Married with Children ranking episodes or any of my other sitcom or movie ranking episodes on this channel. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. For up-to-date rankings, check out my website at therankpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankpodcast.com. And if you really want to support the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/therankpodcast. But I will leave you with this. Why did Peg offer Marcy some of her Patty Bright cosmetics?
Why is that?
Because she didn't just lose her house, she lost her foundation too.
Okay, I'm waiting for the punchline.
And then comes the part where he says, "Boo this man!"
Well, maybe next time.
Can't see out my glasses. Can't see out my glasses.
He's almost completely blind.